Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
The internet is full of half-truths and all-out lies. We've all seen them, and many people on social media complaining about it. Here's your chance to show and prove. WorldAfropedia.com is a black-owned and operated encyclopedia. There are several thousand articles, but we need help. We can't uncover all the truth ourselves. So please, join us and become a writer, editor, or blogger for WorldAfropedia.com today. Every little bit counts. We owe it to the future generations to put the truth out there. Visit WorldAfropedia.com, the African-centered encyclopedia, a global database of African knowledge for the purpose of bringing about global African wisdom and understanding. WorldAfropedia.com.
I don't have to explain that bar.
AJ Tracy is a young grime MC from Ladbroke Grove. He recently endorsed Corbyn before the general election, speaking about council housing in his area near Grenfell Tower. I spoke to him and his brother about how the community are dealing with the disaster.
My house is right behind it. Like from my window, if you look out my window, you can see the block. Obviously, man's walk past it every day alive, but man's going gym. It's just in the area, bruv. And a lot of people...
Hundreds of people we know in the block.
A lot of people I know and knew, obviously, rest in peace, were in that block. So this is the richest borough in London. The average wage... In Europe, there we go. The average wage is 100k. Like, if people put that in their head, 100k average wage, that's crazy. I don't want to bring it into a race thing, but honestly, anyone who's, of colour, can't really buy a house here. It's unheard of. I've never seen any of my friends and family. My mum's never been able to buy a house here. She lived there for ages. Or my dad, or any of my brethren's dads or mums. You know what I'm saying? Everyone's living in council houses.
You've seen the last couple of days the way the community have gathered round. That's how it is around here. We're not a community. We're a family. We're Muslims. We're Christians. We're Sikhs. We're Hindus. We're Spanish. We're white, we're black, we're Moroccan, we're Algerian, we're everything. And they're just trying to slowly but surely push us out and bring in either the Chelsea set or Russian vacant homeowners.
In response to this week specifically, what is it that you've noticed? What is it that when you've been about, that people are talking about the most?
When I'm out on the road and people are saying obviously the government don't want us here and they didn't pay for the certain for the cladding, the correct cladding and stuff like that. These things they're really sad, but they're not a shock to me at all. I know what they're on. I know what RBKC's on. It doesn't surprise me at all. They do mad things, but they want to shut down Carnival. Carnival's like one of the gems of the UK. People love Carnival. It's this area, Notting Hill and Portobello, is the most multicultural place in Europe. It's crazy.
In the world.
In the world. Do you get what I'm saying? And they want to shut it down. And that's a celebration of culture, colours, happiness. There's nothing negative about it. And they always want to twist it and make it negative just because the rich people don't like the noise or they don't like seeing brown people outside their window. Come on, man.
The real thing that I've seen in the last couple of days, I've seen no central government response.
Yep.
I've seen no local government response.
Yep.
I have to big up the Muslims here. The Muslim response has been epic. It's on an unimaginable scale. Muslims are coming down from Birmingham, from Leicester, from Luton, to come and help us here. And the government can't even get off their arse and send anyone in. If this was a flood in a Tory constituency somewhere in Hampshire, right, there would have been the army sent in.
I've been with a lot of people who were really upset, and people are talking about things like, is there going to be a riot, this, that and the other. And obviously I feel personally that if something kicked off, it would be the people who were angry and upset with reason who would end up suffering twice over. But I just wanted to know what I don't know, guess what you kind of thought of that, because a lot of people are talking about it.
I don't agree with that at all, innit? The writing thing, it's not cool, bruv.
You get nothing from writing.
I've told all the man them, we live here, innit? You can't be fucking up. Alright, I'm sorry. You can't be mashing up.
You can swear, it's fine.
I can say, alright, cool. You can't be fucking up our area, yeah. I understand that might be a way to get your anger out, to vent a little bit, but that's not solving anything. They're not going to give you any answers. They'll probably be more reluctant to give you answers after you riot.
They just demonise us.
And it's an easy way for them to say, look, these people, they're savages, they don't want help for themselves, they're just hood rats and do you get what I'm saying? So it's easier if we peaceful protest and we show that we're civilised and we push for answers the legitimate legal way and pressure them using their own game, basically. That's the way to do it. That's my opinion.
The truth is, I was talking at protest to countless people trying to tell them, look, peaceful protest. And their simple answer is, well, it's getting us nowhere. Nobody's even responding to us. So they feel like they have to push different kinds of buttons to get a response. It's not the right way to go about things.
But I understand it.
It's
I understand it.
understandable
I understand it.
that
Yeah.
they feel like they have to get a reaction. There's nobody even coming out and talking to them. The central government response has been shambolic. Theresa May, you have a lot of questions to answer genuinely.
She needs to resign, to be honest.
Yeah.
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Monday, June 19th, 2017. So I have been told. Obviously, we are on much earlier than our normal broadcast time. That's 2 days in a row. We have been on earlier than our normal broadcast time. And again, because of the importance, in my view, of understanding that the system of white supremacy is a worldwide problem. If you are black especially, but any non-white person in the world, it does not matter where you happen to be at. Racism, white supremacy, unfortunately, is going to be a monumental obstacle in your life. We certainly spent a good bit of time yesterday, Sunday, our global Sunday talk on racism. We do it once a month. We had a lot of our black British listeners tuning in and talking about the Grenfell Tower fire from last week. The latest reports that I've seen, the police, London police, have said that the number of presumed dead is now at 79. We talked about that yesterday, how that number started so low in a 24-story tower where the entire building was engulfed in flames, and this fire started in the middle of the night where you have hundreds of residents, and the number of fatalities started at 12, and now it's slowly gone up to 79. They're still saying that they have not identified everybody or found all of the folks who are still missing, that they have not heard from. We talked about that yesterday with a lot of detail, and particularly touching on how racism is a huge aspect of what happened with this event. Thought it would be great. We've had a number of guests on the program over the years to share constructive information with us about how racism operates in London, England, other parts of the world. Our guest for today's program, she's been with us repeatedly before. In fact, she even has recommended some great guests for the program. She recommended on one of her previous visits that we have Miss Janetta Rose Barras on the program. She wrote the book Whatever Happened to Daddy's Little Girl. We had her on in 2013. She also recommended that we have Dr. Shafia Monroe. She is the founder of the International Center for Traditional Childbearing. We had her on the program as well. Always like to follow up and people give us good guest recommendations. In addition to setting us up, letting us know about those folks' great work, she also shared her own work and what she's been doing over in the UK for a number of years at this point. She is a globally acclaimed reparationist. In fact, we mentioned the Reparations March that's coming up later this summer in London. That was mentioned on the program yesterday. I think she will be participating in that event and will be giving us more details. She is a Jurisconsult, a dynamic community advocate, and a radio broadcaster herself. She has been out. In fact, we just played a segment. She was on the BBC's program, The Big Questions, earlier this year, just a few weeks ago, in fact. And the segment that they were addressing was, can white people be victims of racism? We played the segment here, and myself, many of our listeners thought she did a phenomenal job in explaining that that is absolutely absurd. White people cannot be victims of racism, and they even gave her the last word to be emphatic in making her point. We're so glad to have her on the program today to hear her views on the catastrophe at the Grenfell Tower, as well as racism, white supremacy in the London, England area in general. So glad to have her back with us, joining us live from the UK, Mrs. Esther Stanford-Xosei. Miss Esther Stanford-Xosei, you with us, ma'am?
I am. Greetings to you and to all who are listening. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. There was a short delay, but yes, ma'am. We can hear you clearly now.
Greetings.
Greetings. For our listeners, and there might be a little bit of a delay since it's such a distance, but for our listeners, I'm sure there's some folks they might have missed some of your previous visits to the cows, just anything that you think would be helpful for listeners to know about who you are and the work that you do?
Okay, well, you explained it very well. I am a reparationist. Basically, that's a reparations activist. I'm a campaigner, a community advocate, and a jurisconsult, which is a specialist lawyer in the field of jurisprudence, the science and the philosophy of law. So that's basically what I do. And I'm very much involved in reparations social movement building, in particular the International Social Movement for African Reparations, which we call ISMAR as the acronym. So my work is 24/7 about trying to restore, regenerate, renew, and to help our people repair ourselves. So that's what I do all of the time. I'm also actually undertaking PhD research in history. I'm one of under apparently 10 people of African heritage in the UK who are doing a PhD in history, because there's very few of us. And my research is action research, and so it's really based on examining the ISMAR, the International Social Movement for African Reparations, from within as an insider researcher. And so my research has been documenting the recent history of the movement in the UK, but also tracing it back historically to its origins in the 18th century.
Wow. And we will get some of the details about what's going to be coming up in August with the march that you're going to be a part of, one of the biggest, if not the biggest march for reparations in the world. But before we get to some of what's going to be coming up, there's been so much attention around the world on the Grenfell Tower fire. This is in the Notting Hill area of England, unless I've been misinformed. As I stated, as the latest reports that I've seen earlier today, that they said now the number of presumed dead is at 79. This is a 24-story tower, the Grenfell Tower fire from last week. Your initial thoughts on the catastrophe?
Well, yes, like yourself and many others, indeed, around the world, very, very disturbed. It's been heartbreaking to watch what has been going on. And of course, the situation is further compounded by the lack of information and, in fact, the underreporting of the casualties and also those who have been killed as a result of this fire. The figure that you have given is, yes, what they have officially released today in terms of the UK police. However, many people in the community are saying that this number is very low, given the fact that, as you said, this is 24 stories, and the figures of in between 500 and 600 people have been suggested as being how many people should have been in those tower blocks. And we haven't seen an overwhelming amount of victims come forward to say, well, I was there and I escaped. So this question of what's happened to all these missing people, and the language that gets used is quite interesting because they talk about missing. Well, people shouldn't be missing. This is where they lived. Surely if many of the people who were residents in the tower were, alive, they would make contact with family members, they would present themselves to hospitals or emergency services. So yes, there is a lot of disquiet about the lack of information that is being given in particular to families and to residents, and of course the local organisations and residents associations that have been very much part of the struggle to try and actually get some kind of redress in terms of the housing conditions that many of the residents of Grenfell Tower and the surrounding area have been, subjected to.
Wow, I think that's extremely important, what you just touched on in terms of the difficulty in obtaining accurate information, and that got brought up. In fact, I was hearing that pretty immediately with this event. Within the first 24 hours, they were talking about some of the other fires that have happened in the UK. We talked about the New Cross fire from 1981 that ended up resulting in the quote-unquote Brixton riots shortly afterwards. We talked about different incidents, but the pattern being difficulty in getting accurate information. And many of the reports that I've seen, both stateside, NPR, and other mainstream outlets, as well as publications from your neck of the woods, where they've said it's going to be difficult getting accurate identification for all of the victims because of the intensity of the heat, and even ascertaining how many people died because you don't know how many people were actually in the building at the time of the fire. You don't know how many visitors were there, people that were present that aren't accounted for. And just because I keep go ahead. No. I'm just agreeing with you. I mean, it's catastrophic and of really epic proportions. And of course, our hearts go out to those who are struggling on the ground and who are waiting for news, but obviously fearing the worst. But more importantly, I'm involved with an entity called the Global African People's Parliament, which is really an African heritage community institution. And when I say African heritage, we recognize people who are not only born on the continent of Africa, but who recognize that they are of African ancestry and heritage, whether they self-define in that way or not. And we put out a statement a few days ago. And how we characterize what's happening is we saw it as another crime of the Maangamizi, against which we must all keep rising up. And Maangamizi is a key Swahili term that really speaks to the intentionality of a Holocaust. And it typically is associated with people of African heritage in terms of our experience of chattel enslavement, colonialism, and now neo-colonialism, genocide, white supremacy, the whole range. But of course, the Maangamizi is not just interpersonal, it is structural and it is also systemic. And so it will impact on other people who do not self-define as African or even black. And so that's how we have characterized it. And of course, we share, and this is taken from our GAP public statement on this, which can be found on the Global African People's Parliament's website, which is www.globalafrican, spelt with a K, peoplesparliament.org. And of course, we express outrage as well with not only the local people, but in particular, people should be aware of the Tenants Association, the Residents Association, that had been raising this issue about what had been going on and who had been ignored. And in fact, they had predicted that it would take something devastating and catastrophic for there to be change. And so we acknowledge the work of local activists and local campaigning groups who had been exposing this inequality, who had been trying to work for systemic change and also improvements to the living conditions, and in particular the housing conditions. And this is kind of like akin to what happened with Hurricane Katrina. So that institutional neglect, that disregard for the lives of our people, but also people who were racialized as so-called other, including white other, so-called poor people, but I prefer to say impoverished people, and this way in which people were just left. It wasn't treated as an emergency. And of course, for those of you who have been following what's been going on, there's lots of local reports about the lack of a reaction, the lack of support, the lack of intervention of local government, of central government, even national government in that sense. And so it's very, very problematic. But of course, we do have to commend the work of the people on the ground, not only the local people and the family members as well, but the communities, the various communities that make up that area who have come on board, who have come and provided support, people of
been donating aid, as it were, from across the country and even locally, and many people from across the country have actually gone there to join in that effort to try and provide some kind of relief and support to people who obviously are extremely traumatized. I mean, it's traumatizing even for people who have got nothing to do with this area, who don't know any of the people. It is traumatizing for many of us.
Absolutely. I think black people anywhere in the world, non-white people anywhere in the world watching these events, absolutely. It is just traumatizing seeing it. But I wanted to emphasize, because you said it, Hurricane Katrina, which is what I was thinking of. And in fact, one of the articles I read today, they were saying that this is Prime Minister Theresa May's Katrina moment, where she's been roundly criticized for her response and not talking to the victims and providing more support, exactly as you stated. And when I think of Katrina, just going back to the identification of bodies and missing and finding out, getting an accurate count of the victims, as you said, having not too much regard, not too much value for black life. When I see that statement in this sort of event, it kind of lets me know, oh, okay, racism is going to be practiced on this because we're letting people know from the very beginning. It seems like a lot of non-white people, black people might have died in this event. We don't even care to get this correct, to count up who died, how many people were victims, did they die. They said the exact same thing about Hurricane Katrina, and they say that to this day, we have no idea how many people actually died. We have people that never got identified. They said that it's been more than 10 years, and they say that. I could see the exact same thing happening here, and in my just monumental respect, I do not see that sort of thing happen when the victims are white people. I just wanted to emphasize that. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. And but for me, it's where do we go from here with this? And of course, a lot of people, including obviously the people who have been affected, victims, survivors, their families, their community members across the board, and everybody that has gone there just out of concern, just who wanted to offer their skills. But we have to ensure in going forward that we sustain a people's movement in order to provide some of the systemic changes that are necessary, so that it's not just a matter of people just descending on the area, as often happens, and for good reasons, but equally it is about how do we ensure that the agency remains with the people who have been affected, their local communities, and that they can be supported to rebuild communities, to re-establish their homes, and to have restored to them everything that they have lost. So in our GAP statement, what we call for is a heightening of participatory democratic resistance in the creation of a people's movement to affect the kind of change that we need to bring about. That is not just going to be our people, it's also going to take other people who are fed up of the system being the way it is, of the unfairness, of the inequality, even when they are not sharing, if you like, the privileges and the benefits that other, so for instance, white people racialized as white are sharing. And we must ensure that we build this movement in so that we can have the power to bring an end to such dangerous living conditions and contraventions of the health and safety legislation that were inflicted upon tenants and leaseholders. Ultimately, however, we must strive to do all that is humanly possible to prevent another such tragedy occurring by ensuring that we not only build on the local community struggles that have already been in existence, but we also seek to transform them into ones that are capable of not only resisting, because we're good at that, but also dismantling the existing undemocratic status quo. We must similarly work to ensure that those who have been made homeless as a result of this tragedy are not shipped out of the borough as we have seen with other racialized and impoverished families. We must also organize to ensure that those people, their families, and the groups affected are enabled to remain in their communities that they've known for years, that they've been building for years, that they are provided with adequate, decent, affordable, not only temporary housing in terms of the right now, but permanent housing, that they are provided with the cost of resettlement, replacing their possessions, and repairing the damage, which is the reparation holistically of all that has been lost, including their homes, their livelihoods, established social networks, and that the Grenfell residents are able to implement their right to the city, which is an emerging codification of a human and a collective or a group stroke people's right, the right to the city, not to be victims of gentrification, not to be farmed out to less savoury areas, that they can also implement their rights to environmental justice, because this was also a question of environmental racism, and also holistic sustainable development as a community. Furthermore, that this also occurs in ways which minimise displacement, facilitates their community continuity, facilitates community self-determination, and very importantly, community self-governance, and guarantees the reparatory justice redistribution of income and wealth locally. So not only globally, but locally, the local and the global together, which is what we call glocally. And that's really key, because the clips that you played at the beginning of the show really just gave a snapshot of the huge income and wealth inequality and disparities that they are. And of course, we know that these disparities have untold negative effects and consequences in terms of people's health, their right to life, the kind of lives that they're able to lead, and so forth. And finally, what we say in the Global African People's Parliament is that we must ensure that such new domains and locales are transformed into healthy and lively places to live, work and play, which meet the environmental justice requirements for the ecological harmonization of the built, but also the natural environment. It is such transformation that will enable, as we hope, all of us to appreciate the African wisdom in living by the ethics and the principle of Ubuntu. I am because you are, and because you are, therefore we are too.
Context of White Supremacy, Mrs. Esther Stanford-Xosei, visiting us live from England. For people either in the States or people other parts of the world outside of England, the Grenfell Tower, it's in Notting Hill, unless I'm misinformed. I know they were saying on the BBC and other English channels, they were saying, I guess for people elsewhere, they might have seen Notting Hill, Julia Roberts, and think, oh, this is some, posh, swanky area, which I guess some parts of it are, but that is not Grenfell Tower, unless I've been misinformed. You have a lot of non-white people, a lot of black people, a lot of people who are in poverty living in this, who were living in this unit, which is why I focused on and said, hey, this is an incident of white supremacy racism, because this is happening to a disproportionate number of non-white people who lived in this particular building. Is that accurate? And can you speak to the gentrification of this area in terms of moving non-white people out, which is what some people fear this event could help accelerate?
Yes, I mean, gentrification is happening across many sites in the UK, in England in particular, and of course in London. So Brixton is another area that perhaps many of your listeners will be familiar with, and that's happened in Brixton too. And of course, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. Now, interestingly, data on inequality in the whole of England, drawn from the UK government's English Indices of Deprivation of 2015, shows that the area surrounding Grenfell Tower to have been amongst the most deprived in the country. So it's the most wealthiest borough. Apparently it has millions, I can't even remember the exact figure, but a huge amount of money in reserve. So it's extremely wealthy, as was also explained in the clips that you played at the beginning of the show. But amidst all this wealth and these properties in excess of 100K, you do have these pockets of deprivation. And that was where Grenfell Tower was. So it was surrounded by inequality. There were clear differences in the income and disparities in wealth, employment, life expectancy, compared to those who were living in luxurious private residential housing literally just meters away. And Kensington, the royal borough of Kensington and Chelsea, yes, it contains not only some of the most expensive properties in the UK, but actually in the whole world. But at the same time, it has one of the highest rates of residential overcrowding and the highest rate of what's called out-of-borough placements for homeless people. And that is basically where homeless people from one London borough are moved into another London borough. Normally, because it's expedient to do so for the council, it's probably cheaper. And this is why people are getting moved out of established homes, established communities and areas where they might have been living for a long time or even decades. And so this is really what's happening. And this is obviously symptomatic of gentrification, not only within the London Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, but in communities across the country, where council officials and developers have used the politically neutral language of economic development, sustainability, and the construction of public amenities to justify their gentrification, to justify land enclosures and what we call enclosures of the commons, which is all the common public spaces that are being enclosed for only specific groups of people. And property seizures, because when they enclose land, they also enclose the common property that should be shared, if you like, for the benefit of all, certainly who are living locally. And what this process does is it's designed to obfuscate, to hide the realities of gentrification being a process which ejects and contains residents who are generally working class and or otherwise racialized. And a lot of our people, black people, people racialized as non-white, fit into this category. So that is what we're seeing. And of course, it has huge implications for people's physical and collective well-being. And if you like, all the conditions that we require as human beings to exist, to further our communities, to further our group. And all of this is being, if you like, attacked because of this huge inequality that we are seeing in the borough, where children can only go to particular schools now because of these enclosures. And of course, the quality of education is different or of much poorer standard than the quality of education where those who live in the more affluent parts of the borough are sending their children. And we know that education is important in terms of the starts that we give ourselves in life and the opportunities that we use, if you like, as a springboard to then go into other fields and realms.
Wow. When we had our our panel of Black Britons on the broadcast yesterday, and I asked a lot of them, I think a lot of us saw the same thing in a lot of the coverage of the Grenfell tragedy. Folks were saying, hey, this is not about race. We're not going to take this moment, play the race card, stir up a whole lot of controversy. This is about class, because you had white people who lived at Grenfell, who were poor, who suffered, who are now homeless, and some of them may have even died in this tragedy. This has nothing to do with racism. This is about class. How would you respond to that, Miss Esther Stanford-Xosei?
I do not agree. I believe there are class dimensions, but it is equally about race. Race in terms of the structuring of society, the ordering of society, a pecking order that puts a particular people who are racialized as white at the top of that pecking order and everyone else underneath that. So whether people call themselves black, whether they call themselves brown, so lots of immigrant communities, migrant communities, refugee communities, how can we not say that is about race? Because the very conditions that people are living in, how people have traveled to the UK, how they have come to be here is a racialized context. Many of them, I'm sure, would like to be living in their own countries of origin, but for various reasons, and because, you know, of the imperialist nature of global white supremacy, many people are prevented from living, if you like, a good quality of life in the countries of their birth and origin, and where, if you like, the majority of their family members and community members are. So it is actually, that's why we call it a manifestation of the Mangamizi, which epitomizes the intersection between race and impoverishment, or race and social class. Yes, so there is an intersection between the two, because whilst I accept that there were so-called white working class people and are living and working in the area and struggling with everyone else there, I do recognize and accept that. It's also the case that, you know, we can't divorce that racial context, because the nature of whiteness, as if you like, the wages of whiteness, means that we've seen historically and many contemporary examples where so-called white working class communities, you take them out of that specific context and you put them into another one, and they end up being on the top of the pecking order. Yes. And so to just deny that race is a factor, when you look at the fact that how is it that you have the most affluent parts that are majority white, and then the parts that you know, in terms of Grenfell Tower, and the parts that are deprived, you see the so-called multicultural community. That is about race, unless we say that it doesn't matter. So I believe that our analysis needs to be sharper, and we mustn't get into this divide and rule, because at the moment there is such hostility to those of us who talk about race. And part of it, I believe, is a reaction to what they see has been a narrow formulation of everything just being about race that has denied other manifestations of our inequality and our displacement, such as so-called social class and even gender. Yes. And so so there's been an attempt to just say everything should be race first, and there's a particular strand of people who will define themselves or perhaps be classified as cultural nationalists who have elevated, if you like, race. But we have to see race in a context of a power system that has many different tentacles. And if you look at the peoples who are classified of being of a lower class, they tend to be people who are black, who are racialized as non-white. So you could be a billionaire, as is what happened with Oprah Winfrey when she came to one of these European countries, but she walked in a store and she was followed around like she was a thief. That is what we're talking about. So even though you would say that she is very rich and very wealthy, she was just seen as being of a particular lower class by people racialized as white who were, if you like, the shopkeepers and those working in the shops. Yeah. So that's the point that we need to emphasize. It's both working together. And in the UK, there is a great hostility, especially amongst many anti-racist organizations that might be white-led or have a significant proportion of white members, where they try and minimize the insignificance of race and just want to reduce everything to class, to say, well, we're all poor, struggling together. But no, historically, the white working class has always been used by their upper classes, the elite classes, against, as a buffer, if you like, against people racialized as non-white, and we cannot ignore that historical but also that contemporary reality.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask also, as I said, in the coverage that I've seen a lot of references to the Grenfell situation happen. We can't believe that we have allowed this to happen again. We had Lakanen, which happened some time ago. This was a fire that happened a few years back, maybe 5 years back. It was a bad fire that also happened in the UK. There you go. More detail.
Yes. 6 people died and 20 people were injured. Yes.
Right. This was just not that long ago, but I have not heard, other than this program, I have not heard reference to the New Cross fire from 1981 at all, really. And when I looked back to refresh my memory, because we talked about it on this program even before the Grenfell situation last week, and they were still, like to this day, 2017, there's still controversy about what started the fire. Was this an act of racism, an act of arson, and even starting the fire? You had death of children there. I think 13 people perished altogether, and a lot of the same things happen. Number one, do you think that's an accurate comparison, this 1981 incident? And why do you think that?
Absolutely. And that context is still a bitter context for those who were affected, the family members, of course, acknowledging those young people that tragically lost their lives, and there still are not sufficient answers. And you're right to bring that in because it hasn't really been referred to. But that was a significant moment for us, people of African heritage, so-called Black people. And the New Cross fire at the time galvanized an uproar, and in fact the historic Black People's Day of Action on the 2nd of March in that year, where over 25,000 people marched in protest at the injustice, at the institutional neglect, at the lack of care, the lack of regard, the fact that there wasn't an official message of condolence that came from the Queen of England or even the Prime Minister at the time. So yes, it is a very important context, and there are lessons, I believe, that we are still learning as to how that was dealt with. Even in the reporting, I don't know if you've observed this, but a lot of the reporting, you have seen very few Black people, as it were, if I use that term, being interviewed in terms of perspective. And when we kind of tend to stay perspectives, well-meaning. What I've noticed is that with other groups, especially Arabic-speaking groups and Muslim communities, you get this sense that they are part of communities. Yes, they're not just isolated individuals with no connection to each other. They are part of communities. And whilst I recognize that our people who live in the borough, people of African heritage, African Caribbean heritage, and other so-called Black communities, we have to examine that, because we cannot continually keep talking about, well, we are one community, but everyone else has another community that they stand on that gives them that sense of power, not just locally, but actually globally and internationally. And we are just individuals. Yes. That is a huge weakness and problem. And I think that's one of the things that I am observing and reflecting on. How do we ensure that this moment is used to raise people's consciousness and galvanize them into taking action that traditionally would have been seen as the priority of a fringe group of nationalists, whether they were cultural nationalists or revolutionary nationalists? I believe that we as a people need to put nationalism back on the agenda, because we are surrounded by nationalism, but we don't see it. It's so strong that we don't see it. It's so everyday that we don't see it. We don't see the white nationalism. And there's a huge amount of white nationalism, not only reactionary white nationalism, but progressive nationalism in terms of the Scottish people's struggle for independence, Irish desire to have a united Ireland, and so So we're surrounded by people who are trying to a national will and national identity. And we, the people who are self-defined as Black or African heritage or Caribbean or whatever we call ourselves, because there are many different descriptors, we are not really, I believe we're not doing enough to consolidate a nationalism that we feel comfortable with. Yes, and that for me has to be a key way forward, because otherwise we will never ever have the power to respond effectively. We will always be at the foot as spectators, and that's how I've seen a lot of our people, literally as spectators, as observers, but not literally at the drawing board as definers, as shapers and makers of our own destiny. And that is really where we need to be heading. And those who have traditionally seen themselves as just Black British, this should be a wake-up call to them. This should be a wake-up call, because this has shown that no matter how long people have been in this country, no matter what passport, and that red passport that those of us who have British citizenship have, it's stark. It's stark. And you've mentioned New Crossfire, but we can go back centuries to see the same treatment. And that's why I believe it's time for Operation Writing on the Wall. We have to see that the writing is on the wall. Every other group is seeing it, and every other group is doing what needs to be done. When you are faced with external attack, and when you are faced with threats to your right to exist, your right to life, your right to live, your right to continue yourself, your right to form networks, community, culture. But we seem to struggle with that.
What would a, quote, African national, unquote, response to the Grenfell tragedy, what would that look like? Since you said you've seen a lot of kind of individual responses from Black Britons thus far, what would an African national response to this event look like?
Well, what it would look like is recognizing that we at present, as so-called Black peoples, are part of different communities, different ethnic groups even. And so we have to be able to see beyond these distinctions that we currently have, to really looking at how do we ensure that we can provide an effective response when tragedies such as this happen. How can we ensure that we are effectively represented in terms of community leaders and spokespersons? How can we ensure that we use, these moments, and there have been many others that are, if you like, the writing on the wall. We keep being warned, get your act together. How do we ensure that we use it to build community, and to also then, through these communities of communities coming together, see ourselves as a nation and a people? And that does also require an educational process, but I don't mean sitting people down in a classroom or just through giving them a textbook. It is really about the education of life through struggle. And so, for instance, in the Global African People's Parliament, we bring together people who are from different Black communities, different African heritage communities, but we're seeing ourselves as, if you like, having a common interest, which is about nation building. But this nation building is not going to be premised on any one particular Black or African identity. This nation building has to be premised on, if you like, a coexistence, a recognition that all of this diversity we have, there is strength in it. If we can use it to harness our people's power, not only locally, nationally and internationally. And what it looks like is us beginning to act as a group who is part of a nation, albeit a nation that is in formation. So a Muslim person, they might be from Syria, they might be from Sudan, they could be from anywhere in the world, but they will say, okay, I'm part of the global Ummah, the global community of Muslims. And it's the same for any other group. But we tend to kind of localize our identities and struggles. We don't link in the way that we used to in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and even 80s with the rest of our people power base, which will often be outside of these shores, what some of us call the land of our captivities. So the Global African People's Parliament has an approach that we're working towards, which is called the African Heritage Community for National Self-Determination. And what that means is that we are a nation. We are different African peoples, different so-called black peoples who have come together from different places in the world, but we recognize that we have a strategic goal of nation building. But we cannot use the nations that we just currently come from. They're too small. They're not necessarily able to provide for our collective security and empowerment as a people. And therefore, we know that in the global configuration of geopolitics and the global alliance, if you like, of communities and nation building that is happening around the world, we have to also do our own bit of the nation building. And so what we're saying is that at the moment, people are just part of African heritage communities, but they're not really communities seeking national self-determination, which is self-determination as a nation group, not as an ethnic minority, which is how we often get referred to as black minority ethnic. And really, when you're just a black minority ethnic person, or you classify yourself in that way, you are, if you like, subservient to or beholden to the state giving you recognition of your so-called rights. And that doesn't happen. Whereas what you see with other groups is that they assert their national identity. So if you've got many Palestinians in the UK, they might never ever live in Palestine, but they recognize their homeland is Palestine, and that all their struggles in the UK and everywhere else where they are in diaspora is with a view to uplifting that nation. So-called Jewish people know that too with the state of Israel. So a Jewish person, no matter where they're born, knows once they have been recognized as being a Jew through the mother line, that they have a right to belong to the state of Israel. And belonging is also about having the protections. So if anything happens, you'll get the various organizations that they have come down on people in community defense of their members. And so that is what we are working to in terms of the Global African People's Parliament, but we're not doing it all ourselves. What our role is really to help facilitate and stimulate that leadership from within the various communities that exist at this time, so that the people themselves are empowered to want that again, because we used to want it. We used to want it, and we can want it again, and we have to want it again if we are to not only survive, but thrive. And if we are to counter the genocide and the ecocide that is happening to our people wherever we are on planet Earth. So that's what we are seeking to do, to get our people in every country where we reside, that we need to kind of come together. We need to cross these boundaries. We need to stop referring to ourselves according to the borders that have been shaped and named and classified by Caucasians. We need to stop referring to ourselves by just the passport in the land of our birthplace necessarily. And we have to begin to see the global situation of our people. Doesn't matter what language they speak or even what they call themselves. What we will see is a commonality of experience. We will see a commonality of cultural forms, of resilience. We will see a commonality of resistance. And that is when we will see that we have a global power base. again. Because as Malcolm X, the great Malcolm X, taught us decades ago, real power is international. It is not local, and it is not just confined to the national borders that we currently identify with. It is international. And in fact, Malcolm, in terms of the Organization of Afro-American Unity, spoke very much about the significance of Africa. And he said, if your power base is only here, and of course he was talking about a US context, he said you can forget it. You can't build a power base here. You have to have a power base among brothers and sisters. You have to have your power base among people who have something in common with you. They have to have some kind of cultural identity, or there has to be some relationship between you and your power base. When you build a power base in this country, and he's talking about the US, but it equally applies to those of us in the UK and everywhere that we find ourselves, he says you're building it where you aren't in any way related to what you build it on. No, you have to have that base somewhere else. You can work here, but you'd better put your base somewhere else. Don't put it in this man's hand. And he says any kind of organization that is based here can't be an effective organization. Anything you've got going for you, if the base is only here, it's not going to be effective. Your and my base must be at home, and this is not our home.
Context of white supremacy. I see we had folks who dialed in who did want to get a question in. The number, I'll give it out really quick. If you have a question you would like to ask Mrs. Esther Stanford-Xosei, the number 641-715-3640. The code 564943 #. Press star 6. If you have a question, take advantage. Always encourage listeners, take advantage. When we have folks on the program, guests who are in different parts of the world, take advantage. Get an opportunity to ask some questions about the global dynamics of white supremacy, racism. A person who dialed in, I think this is Thomas in New York. Thomas in New York, if you had a question, afternoon, sir. Thomas in New York, you with us? Maybe this isn't Thomas in New York.
Yes, it is. It is. I'm sorry, I was muted. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Good evening, Gus, and good evening to your guests. That was the last piece you just added was just excellent. Based off of what you just said about nationalization, what national identity does she think that all Black people around the globe should identify as?
Okay. Thank you for that question. I will keep it very simple. I use the term African, and I believe that that is an identity that we can come together around. And so, as long as we have a continent that is called Africa, I believe that we should classify ourselves according to that description. And of course, it's an umbrella term. And who is an African? Who we will even be 50 years from now, 100 years from now, we are still shaping. Because when I talk about African, I'm not just talking about people on the continent of Africa. I'm talking about the African diaspora, spread across the 4 corners of planet Earth. So the African diaspora in Oceania, in Australasia, in Asia, everywhere where our people are. Obviously the so-called Americas, or Abyalala as the indigenous people refer to it as, Europe, the so-called Caribbean, etc. So that's a term that I would use. I know there's a lot of debate about that, whether we're Moors, should we be classifying ourselves as indigenous? And I don't see them necessarily as counter arguments. I believe that there's a lot of knowledge, there's a lot of value in the various discourses and the various ways in which we have conceptualized our people's struggle wherever we are. And we must be able to build on and utilize everything that we can in forging the best way forward. But bearing in mind, we are a global people, and there are huge amounts of us. That is going to present many challenges. But at this stage, I would say the majority of people would at least recognize that they are African, or they might refer to themselves as people of African descent. I don't like the term descent because of its connotations, obviously, in the English language. But I recognize the 250 plus million people in so-called South Central America that classify themselves as Afro descendants. That is a huge power base in itself.
That answers.
Okay. Question. I have a follow-up to that question, but I wanted to get my other question in. I wanted to know, in the UK, to become a lawyer, is there a type of, like here in the U.S., you have to pass the Bar Association, you have to get a P number. Is that the same process in Britain?
Yes, it is. In Britain, there's a two-tier system. We have what's called solicitors, and then we have what's called barristers, who what they are called to the bar. And the solicitors are kind of, they are lawyers as well. Advocates, they tend to do a lot of court representational work too. They tend to be the first point of call. And barristers get, people get to barristers through normally the solicitor bringing them in terms of specialist legal representation. That is conventional legal practice. But there's also a body of legal practice that we call unconventional critical legal practice that has a number of related professions. So the notion of what is a lawyer, we cannot just leave it in the hands of the very hegemonic forces of white supremacy that are telling us what is law, what is lawful, who can be admitted, if you like, into the fraternity of what they call lawyers. And so law itself is a battlefield as to what it is, who shapes it, and who defines it. And I come from a tradition in law that believes that law is something that is made by the people. And that especially a people who have been oppressed and subjugated have a bigger claim, if you like, to the just exercise and development of law than those who traditionally get associated with lawmaking, such as judges and various types of lawyers or attorneys or advocates or whatever term that we may use. So this notion of law as resistance. So some of the best lawyers that I know are people who've never formally studied law. The Mumia Abu Jamals, who in terms of jailhouse lawyering, many of the resistance leaders of the independent struggles of in our countries, home countries, were some of the best lawyers. And so there is a tradition of law that is felt by and is created and shaped by the people who have been denied access to justice and the just exercise and enforcement and development of law.
I asked you that because here in America, every lawyer I ask...
Let's just get to our question.
Yeah, I can never get an answer as to what the BAR stands for. So can you tell me what the acronym BAR is?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's to do. I mean, I'm assuming the US system is modelled on the British system, but it's to do with, if you like, the legal fraternity of barristers, and it's tied up a lot in English kind of legal traditions of how people solicited for clients historically, and how they then got admitted to the fraternity of people who could legitimately go and also solicit for clients. But it's not, I never got called to the bar, so it's not something that I actually embraced. And obviously we know there's a lot of Masonic dimensions to the bar as well. So in a UK context, they call them temples, and there's a lot of ritualistic and Masonic practices that go along with people who get called to the bar. And it just depends on, in my view, who you wish to serve, what forces that you wish to serve in your lifetime. And for some of us, we choose not to serve those forces.
Hang tight, Thomas in New York. We have some of the other callers dialed in who have questions as well. The caller at last four digits, 7720. Did you have a question for Mrs. Esther Stanford-Xosei? Your line should be open.
Yeah, how you doing? Good evening, Gus. Good evening to the guests. Appreciate the time and effort. I wanted to know about the March for Reparations. Like, what is the final goal that you're trying to get out of there? Do you see that if it's going to be successful? If this is not going to be successful, what other phase do you feel it needs to be involved in order to get to a successful and be accomplished in that area?
Thank you. Well, the march now has been going, this is the fourth year on the 1st of August, which many of us have renamed Mosiah after Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and getting away from these Roman, Greek and Roman names that often accompany a lot of what we refer to. But the march has specific aims, and it's a really great question because a lot of people in the UK even have been very ambivalent towards the march. You know, what are we achieving by marching? I'm tired of marching. We've been marching for 50 years. But the march is an initiative that some of us have been involved in from year one. We're not necessarily leading it, but we're working in partnership with those who first started the march. And because it was such a fantastic mobilization of our people around a common cause, and it's so difficult to get our people in the UK to come out in numbers around a common issue. And so in recognition that this was the issue of reparatory justice was something that could unite all of us, no matter the fact that we have different objectives in terms of what we think the end goal is, but most people would accept in some way, shape or form that they support holistic reparatory justice. So we set ourselves 5 key goals, and I have to share them in order to answer your question about whether it will be successful. The first is to draw attention to the African people's global determination to not let the British state and other perpetrators get away with the crimes of the Ma'angamizi, the African Holocaust and continuum of chattel colonial and neo-colonial forms of enslavement. Secondly, to raise consciousness about the fact that all of the attacks upon us, so the state killings, the deaths in custody, everything that's going on, the gentrification, in both individual and collective instances amount to genocide and ecocide in Ma'angamizi continuity, necessitating reparations. Thirdly, to increase awareness of the necessity to stop the Ma'angamizi in its current phase, yes, such as austerity, which kills, the economic policies that are killing people. Grenfell Tower was largely also about austerity and the decisions that were made in terms of cost cutting. Attempts to recolonize Africa, menticide and deaths in police custody, in psychiatric and prison custody also. Fourthly, to demonstrate African people's strength, capacity and determination to speak to and challenge establishment power, so white power if you like, white supremacist power structures, with our growing grassroots power to effect and secure reparations on our own terms. And 5, to showcase African people's grassroots initiatives for reparations. So when we examine those aims, the march will be as successful as we continue to build our communities, nation build, but also in terms of the self-repair agenda, but also in terms of holding to account the British state and other perpetrators who are denying us the right to life today. That is key. So all the things that our people are campaigning about today, all of the movements, everything, what we're saying is these are manifestations of the Maangamizi, whether people recognize it or not, because they didn't just start. The inequality we didn't just wake up with these conditions. They are intergenerational. Just as the wealth has been passed down and the power, so has the impoverishment and the disempowerment. And a big part of our situation is our powerlessness. So the march is a mobilization. It is the coming together of many different communities, campaigns, organizations, leaders, leading people within our community who share the objectives of change, that we need change, systemic change, in order to redress our situation, not just in terms of what has happened to us in the past, but in terms of the kind of future that we are envisioning for ourselves and our children and our children's children. And of course, we recognize that principle of 7 generations. It's not just about us. So the march is very good at actually keeping reparations on the agenda. And not only are we saying this is about self-repairs, which is the ultimate agenda in terms of rebuilding ourselves, but we are seeking to hold to account the British state, which is equally important, especially for those of us who reside in the UK. We cannot think that we can just get some comfort here, whilst this government is free to go around the world helping to fuel terrorism, helping to sponsor agents of our destruction, also further of our motherland. So even to this day, the British government is complicit in the pillaging of resources in excess of what they say 1 trillion. There was a report done by an organization called War on Want that basically says that all of the industries in Africa, the main ones, mining, copper, gold, everything, is controlled not by Africans, but by European multinational corporations who get subsidies, who get funded, who have shareholders that are government officials. So we cannot be alive today, burning up in tower blocks, our children being, marginalized, literally warehoused in prisons. We cannot be sitting here impoverished while the very wealth that we require to live on is being appropriated by the people who historically enslaved our foreparents. That is not what a free people do. A free people, or a people seeking liberation, as we are, have to be able to prevent that rupture, prevent that raping of our land, and prevent this death of the Mediterranean, where our people are literally dying to get to Europe, because they know that they're going to have a better life in Europe because their own countries have become so uninhabitable. And every day they are washing up bodies of African people, not just Syrians, African people from across Africa, especially since the taking out of Gaddafi. And it has become an open graveyard in the Mediterranean. This is actually history repeating itself in the way that our ancestors were thrown aboard ships. That history is repeating itself today, where children are being thrown aboard ships. Adults are being thrown off ships because there's not enough food and provision for them, and they are being trafficked. So yes, some of us believe that we have to do this. We either do this or we die. We do this or we die. We have no choice.
Just this last question. Just to be noted that when you talk to your fellow colleagues, to let them know that this is racial. What went on with the towers is racial. when you're dealing with systematical white supremacy, that there is a huge thing called white sacrifice. And anytime you're trying to look at a bigger picture, whites have to be sacrificed. And when they sacrifice white, they make it in that manner so that way that it doesn't look racial. So it's a whole illusion of things that go on. So now that we have years of marching and years of just lip service. But historically, when we got things done, it's because of revolution. So do you feel like, or do you agree with the uproar of the people and start a revolution that could lead up into bloodshed? Like historically, like you say, history repeats itself in order for us to get further progress?
Yes.
And I'll move my line, that's it.
Yes, and in fact, sorry, because I only answered half your question. In terms of the strategy of the march, very specifically, the march links with the Stop the Mangamese campaigns, which has some specific goals, such as the establishment of a Commission of Inquiry for Truth and Reparatory Justice, which will examine the track record in terms of the British Empire and the genocide it has meted out to black peoples all over the world. And we don't just specifically say African, we say black in that context, because we're including the Aborigine people everywhere where the British Empire went, where they caused that mayhem, they dispossessed the peoples, they committed acts of genocide and so forth. But in terms of the strategy, it is, if you like, a partial strategy to an overall strategy that is about revolution, yes? But we recognize, those of us who are involved with the movement and at its core are revolutionary nationalists, Pan-Africanists, who have come from revolutionary struggles in their home countries. So when we talk about African continental liberation and specific countries, many of them have been part of those struggles, and they had to take up arms in order to liberate territory, at least for a time. And they are working as part of this movement. But we also recognize that in the diasporas, and I can talk from the perspective of the UK, a lot of our people have got a false notion of reality. And they don't necessarily have to struggle in the same ways that our people may do in other parts of the world, such as in the Americas, where people in so-called Afro-descendant people being mined down, gunned down by paramilitary forces. That's not really happening in that overt way in Britain. So what we're saying to the masses of our people who might be afraid of revolution, might not understand their own revolutionary potential, is these are some of the steps that you can at least take. But if you like, what it is, it's a process. It's a process of shifting, refining, and also raising people's consciousness about the next stages that we have to go to if we are to secure our liberation as a people. And that will also include revolution in the ways that you have described, because that has been part of our history. Some of the greatest examples that we call upon, whether it's Palmares or the Haitian Revolution, they didn't just get it by osmosis. They had to do what you have said. And that is what all people have to do. In terms of if you're a true revolutionary and if you want to truly defend your lands and your livelihoods and your territories and your wealth, there's no other way of going about it. But also what we recognize is that many of our people, especially in the UK, where this march has been initiated, don't have to necessarily struggle in that same way in a UK context. And our role is to be, if you like, amplify the voices and communities of resistance that are struggling. There are people right now in the continent of Africa campaigning against governments, not even campaigning, but literally reclaiming lands, retaking back the land. And they are being shot down, mowed down, killed. We've seen it with the multinational corporations. Shell in Nigeria, what happened to Ken Saro-Wiwa, many others who are trying to fight to keep the resources in the ground and to benefit the people, get taken out by sometimes their own governments who are complicit working with the Caucasians. And so we have to find a way to embrace those who might initially not see revolution as the answer, but there will come a point in time where people will either have to move on and take up other forms of struggle, or they will just simply die. But we have to prepare our people. We do not want to be agent provocateurs. We are facing an increasingly militarily sophisticated enemy, both at home and abroad, in terms of the deployment of forces, troops, armies, and so forth against local populations. Even in the communities of the USA and in the UK, we're seeing increasing militarization of our local communities. So our people have to be in training, they have to be organizing, and some of this organizing will not be done in the public, because no serious people does that. But we also have to find ways to keep a public face of what's going on, and the people have to then organize in higher forms of organization. And those people who are best placed to do that will naturally do what all people have had to do in order to be free.
Appreciate that. Caller dialed in with those questions. The person who dialed in, last four digits, 4243. 4243, did you have a question for Mrs. Esther Stanford-Xosei? Caller, last four digits, 4243. Did you have oh, sorry about that. Thought I had opened your line. Let's try it again. 4243, did you have a question?
May I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, thank you, and thank you to Mrs. Stanford-Xosei. My questions are in regards to the Grenfell Tower fire. I just wanted to know if there have been any charities set up that are legitimately going to go to the victims, and also if you all, because I know that it's been referenced throughout the call, this situation being similar to Hurricane Katrina, if you all are basically looking at what happened to non-white people during Hurricane Katrina and trying to actually learn from that to make sure that, like I said, as far as any charities, to make sure that, your parliament or your government doesn't try to take over that and not actually make sure that the victims are getting the help that they need. That's all I had, and I'll mute my line to listen to the answers.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, sister. Well, I'm not really part of that relief effort in Grenfell. I'm not one of the local people. That's in West London, and I'm actually based in South London, and so I'm not necessarily the best person, and I'm certainly not speaking on behalf of any of the victims, their families, or the legitimate community leaders, of which there will be many, because there were many communities there. But I will try and give a general answer to your question with that proviso. And yes, people on the ground are very aware of some of those lessons, and those are some of the discourses that are happening on the ground. What's working very well is social media, WhatsApp, Facebook. There's a lot of messages and information going out in alternative ways, and people are coming together. So there are, but then at the same time, you have, as I'm sure happened with Hurricane Katrina, all kinds of individuals and spokespersons popping up, and that will naturally happen when there's been such tragedies as what has occurred with Grenfell Tower. So the communities on the ground locally, and their national and international communities, because remember, a lot of the people there were from outside of the UK originally, so they're not just confined to West London or whatever. They're part of wider networks, religious, ethnic community networks, and they are, if you like, organizing themselves, and that natural battle, as it were, for representation and for voice and for clarity as to who's speaking for who is coming out. But we need to give that process some time too, because that is part of the process of restoration and repair. There's been various websites set up. So there is a blog that has been set up that's being shared, and it's Grenfell, spelled Grenfell, support.wordpress.com. And that's a blog that seems to have a lot of information that different people on the ground, different support services, organizations, people who are offering assistance are posting on that website what it is that they're doing, how they can support, giving lots of community updates and information to the people. There's also the Grenfell Action Group, which was the Tenants and Residents Association that had raised the alarm about safety in Grenfell Tower for a long time, and many of them were penalised and ostracised and demonised for doing so. They also have a blog that has a lot of information on it. And apparently today there's just been a campaign launched called Justice for Grenfell campaign, and it has some key people who are the spokespersons of that campaign. And so you can just Google those and you'll find out lots of information. So it's something that we have to keep watching, because yes, the natural battles will occur as to who is speaking for who has a mandate, and so forth. And so we can only keep an open ear and obviously our feet on the ground for those of us who are closer by, and just be constantly processing what we are hearing on the ground. But I don't know of any particular charity, and I've been asked this because there have been various people who've wanted to donate and have said, well, are there local charities on the ground that we know for sure where people are going to get the money? I can't say that at this time because I'm not aware, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I think if people can check out the blogs that I have just given, you'll be able to get much more updated information, because the information is changing all the time. What we do know is that a lot of the aid and the goods that have been taken down to the area, they're not really getting to the people. Apparently a lot of them are being taken by whoever, and so there's a lot of confusion at this time, and so it's very, very difficult, unless you are directly living in the area, to know what's happening.
A lot of confusion. Did she have another question? Oh, did she get I'm sorry, Red, did she get both of your questions in terms of learning from Katrina? You had two questions?
No, yes, that was sufficient. Thank you.
Yeah, people are aware. The people on the ground from all different communities are very, very aware of the shenanigans, and they are speaking about it, and they are trying to take back some kind of community control. But I think that's where it goes back to that issue for me of communities, because what we've seen is that other communities are very well organised, but the so-called black, and in a UK context, I would say African heritage communities, are not as well organised in terms of our organisations, our response, who our spokespersons are on the ground, because a lot of us don't necessarily see ourselves as a community. We see ourselves just as individuals, or don't purport to be representing any community. So we have some own community building work to do, and that can't happen without developing structures of accountability and self-representation and self-governance, which is one of the things that we in the Global African People's Parliament have been advocating, is a process that needs to be undertaken by the people on the ground, the residents, the survivors, and the families, and the other communities that they are part of.
Appreciate that, Red. The person who dialed in, I guess maybe this might be our caller in Canada, totally global. Our caller in Canada, did you have questions for Miss Esther Stanford-Xosei?
Oh, hello, Gus, and hello, Miss Stanford-Xosei. I've really appreciated your conversation. It is very constructive and important. I had a question, because I noticed you brought up multiculturalism. And, Gus has heard me say this multiple times. I find that when it comes to listening to African people in America and African people in Britain, there's more conversations around community and nation building, whereas in Toronto, because of the way Canadians talk about white supremacy, are very hesitant towards those things. And one of the problems, I think, has to do with this multiculturalism thing. And I want to know, from in the UK context, do you think that multiculturalism and interracial relationships, because that's one thing I think that's in common in Toronto and the UK, does it distract African people in England from community and nation building, in your opinion?
I think I understand the question that you're asking, and I would say yes, because what we have in the UK, there was some research that was done a few years ago that spoke about the high proportion, 40% a statistic, but with these studies you can only rely on them so far. 40% of what would be classified black men are in between the ages of 18 and I think 45 were in interracial relationships, i.e. they were with a partner racialized as white or another community, and that does have an impact on the ability of such people to want to identify with their, if you like, own group or the original group that they've come from. And many of these relationships, obviously, they have children, and so their children are being socialized to believe that they use this term here. It used to be mixed race, and then because of political correctness, they now talk about dual heritage to be more so-called politically correct. And so a lot of the children kind of feel, well, we don't necessarily belong to one or the other, and we kind of make our own way and form our own community. And so they live in a way that is, they transcend a lot of historical boundaries of group and culture and everything. So that is a factor, because but another factor as well on the other side is that there has been a critique. Now, I'm a nationalist, but I'm not a narrow nationalist, because I also have within some of the patterns that I've described, I also have some of that within my family, and that's not the reason why I'm not a narrow nationalist. But there's also another conversation that's going on in our community where it is said that those of us who purport to be so-called Black conscious or Afrocentric or Pan-Africanist promote a form of race exclusivity or cultural nationalism that is not welcoming or doesn't or recognize the humanity of other groups. So that is a critique. How valid it is, I think I'll have to leave to other people. So there are different dimensions as to why we are in this particular place. And we do, and it goes back to, I guess, even when I'm advocating Africa and Africanness, what do I mean? I don't mean it in a narrow sense. And we do in our communities, and I don't think it's just a UK phenomenon, get into this thing about who's blacker than who and who's more conscious than who, and it gets very, very superficial. And most of our people kind of don't get into this idea about identity and culture and nationalism in that type of way, because they're just living their lives, they're going about their daily business, whatever, in ways that are not necessarily as overtly politicized, and they're certainly not analyzing who they're sleeping with and who they're forming relationships with and who they're having children with. So we have to find ways, I believe, of forming a national identity that actually can not only respect our own humanity, but that's why I emphasize Ubuntu, because a true nationalist, I believe, can recognize the nationalism, and I don't mean it in the sense of national chauvinism, which is quite negative, but can recognize the national aspirations of another national group. So I don't need to complain about what Jews are doing or what Asians are doing or what Arabs are doing, and why is that? No, what I need to do is get busy in the group that I choose to identify with. And many of us can choose to identify with maybe one or two groups, but people need to make choices about where they feel that their attention, their efforts and their focus can best be served. And we also need to recognize that we have, as I said, many children whose parents are from a different group and they have different types of struggles. And we have to find ways of also embracing those that choose to know their, if you like, black side or their African heritage side as well. So that is a challenge for us, and we don't always get it right, but we have to make the way as we are walking the path and if you like, developing ourselves and regenerating ourselves. And that's why we talk about a notion of an African heritage community for national self-determination, because there's a lot that we have to learn from our different experiences of community building and nation building. And how can we promote ourselves, our group, our culture, our nation to the world in a way that doesn't then make it a cesspit of basically vampires and people who just want to come and appropriate everything. And I don't think we've necessarily got that balance right, but we have to keep on struggling to do so.
Wow. Thank you. I appreciate the thoroughness of your answer. Thank you. I'll mute my line.
Appreciate that. Before last few minutes in the broadcast, I wanted to get back, because that was something you just touched on in your response to our Canadian caller, the conflict a lot of times where black people will be getting disputes with other black people about who's, blacker than thou and that sort of thing. There was a lot of that that happened, I think, in February of this year around the controversial and very popular film Get Out. And they had a big to-do between United States actor, black male Samuel L. Jackson, and the black male actor in Get Out, who I believe is a black British citizen. And so they had this big gripe about, the black British actors are taking our roles and that sort of thing. And we talked about it on this program. And I think a sentiment consistently was, this could be a method for racists to do exactly what you said, have black Americans and black Britons arguing and griping with one another. Did you have any thoughts on what happened with all that?
Yes, I mean, I do, and the way you've put it, I think, is very, very succinct. And I think this is the problem. We have to see ourselves in transnational ways, transnational blackness, transnational Africanness, transnational Nubianness, transnational Moorish, whatever identity we go by or that we claim for ourselves, because we allow these borders and constructions of the Caucasian in terms of not that they created them necessarily, but in some instances they did, and they got to define who was in the nation group and who was out. And we ourselves have internalized those notions. We have internalized the white supremacy. We have internalized American exceptionalism. And this is something that some of us who don't define as American or who are not born in the USA or Abialala would say that there is this notion that, well, if you're born in America, somehow you are the world. And there is a view, whether it's right or wrong, but there is a perception. And I believe part of our maturity as a people is about speaking truth to each other in a way that we can listen to each other, that we're not going to want to go and kill each other because we say something that might be offensive or that one of us doesn't like. But this notion that the American empire, it has affected the psyche of so-called black people in America. And so a lot of them don't know very much about people outside of America, whereas a lot of us know American history, so-called black American history. We're taught it in our schools. But when we kind of go overseas, we find that not enough is known about where we live, who the leaders are, what our struggles have been, or in other communities. And that is a problem. because we can't then be perpetrators in a post-reparations world order, which is what we have to prefigure. It's not going to come about because someone's going to just give us a paycheck or a compensation check and then we're going to be healed. No, we're going to have to prefigure by our own hands. And in fact, ultimately, those of us who are reparationists, some of us see it in that way, that it is going to be something we have to take back, in many instances physically, yes? And we have to prefigure that future. We have to prefigure a different reality where we're not going to get upset because an acting role has gone to somebody who we see as being foreign simply because it was white people that called themselves British that colonized some of us. But it was some of the same white people that they say founded some of the United States. So how do we allow ourselves to be separated and to be divided and ruled? And I think the biggest joke is on us if we continue to maintain these artificial boundaries, because if we did DNA, guess what? We would find that many of us have got a lot more in common, because a lot of us didn't come from these places where we currently live. No, I don't care if we've lived 500, 600, 700, 800, 1,000 years. We've come from other places. So let us really kind of go in that quest, in that search to rediscover and recreate who we are. And that is the great thing about being human, about being self-determining. We can recreate ourselves in any way that we choose to do. And we have to create a form of nationalism that is not national chauvinistic and doesn't pride itself on being closer to this white man rather than that white man. I mean, how absurd is that? But that is the damage. And unfortunately, some of those that get elevated in the mass media, the corporate mass media, that they want us following, the ones that they deem to be the successful ones because they can access a degree of material wealth and prosperity, are some of the ones who are the most deranged, the most mental, and those who are, if you like, are actually end up furthering an agenda of auto-genocide, self-genocide.
Dr. Bobby E. Wright, menticide. Let me see. One of our black British listeners, Stacy, she's been with us pretty regular. She was here with us yesterday. She's been one of our participants on workplace racism pretty regularly. She dialed in as well. Did you have a question for Miss Esther Stanford-Xosei, Stacy, or are you just listening in?
Hi, Gus. I did have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi to everybody and hi to Esther. I was really interested in the earlier point you were making around how some of the best lawyers are actually not necessarily recognised by, I guess, the institution of law, and I think that's a really important way of us moving away from the sort of restrictions that are put around us, and also sort of around self-determination. And I think that is as applicable in law as it is in other aspects of life, and probably really important. But I'm interested in how you see that being achieved, particularly as we do as a community still, in whether we recognise it, whether we, as individuals accept and recognise that actually we do look for approval and acknowledgement. It is a very strong factor in how people live their lives, and certainly in terms of the way we even value each other's intelligence and contribution. So just interested in your thoughts on that. I'll move my line first.
No, you're absolutely right. And the power of law is so, I mean, it is really, law itself is a power system. And when we talk about white supremacy, racism, we can't exclude law from that, because a lot of what has been done in terms of dispossessing us, denying our humanity, denying our dignity, falsely classifying people, setting up these hierarchies within groups and across groups, has been done using the power of what I would call unjust law. Some people would just call it law, but law is not neutral. And one of my favorite quotes about the law, that's not from me, it's actually from Karl Marx, and I'm going to quote him here. And he said something like, law is the will of the ruling classes enacted into legislation. So law is about power. Yes, it is about who has the power to enforce their will and make others accept it. And whilst I agree with what you said in terms of an assessment where many of us are at, we kind of get caught up in the status of many of these elitist professions. But there's another tradition within law, and as somebody who is legally trained and who studies law and who teaches a lot about law, and there is the story of law and how social movements and political liberation struggles and national liberation struggles have changed law through the power of people organizing and mobilizing collectively in resistance to an injustice that has happened to their group. And our history is as much about that as it is anything else. If we talk even basic civil rights struggles, our people had to break so-called laws in order to change the laws and so forth. And what we need to be doing is we need to be much more legally literate. We need to raise our legal consciousness, not just in terms of how law is used against us as a tool of oppression, but also how we and how other people, because we must learn from other people's struggles too, how other people have used law to liberate themselves, emancipate themselves, and to win strategic victories. But it cannot happen outside of a mass struggle or a people struggle that is able to create the political context through which more just law, legislation, cases, and so forth, policies and frameworks can then be shaped. So I've been involved with many such initiatives that are around teaching law and the power of law to people who have not been schooled or officially trained in law. And that is a key thing. And there is a tradition even amongst conventional lawyers that they call social justice lawyering or cause lawyering, that has been very much inspired by the history of movements, popular people's movements in resistance to various forms of oppression, that is about lawyers working in partnership with communities and organizations, and the communities, the organizations, the campaigners themselves defining the agenda, defining the legal scope and parameters of the change and the transformation that they are seeking to bring about. And as a Pan-Africanist, I've also been involved in many initiatives that are about creating the body of knowledge and that we call African law and jurisprudence, because law is culture. A lot of the laws that we follow are based on what they call Greco-Roman texts, religious texts and authorities. But every group who has defined themselves into a cultural group, an ethnic group, has also shaped and created law. And so we have to envision a practice of law that is pluriversal, that is, it goes beyond multicultural, and it's really about coexisting systems. And even in the UK we have that. So Muslim communities have Sharia. Some communities are following Sharia, and of course I'm not commenting on Sharia at all. That's not the discussion that I want to have. Jewish communities have the Beth Din, and these are civil courts that often operate. They are tolerated And in some cases, such as the Beth Din, there is British legislation that supports their development. And a lot of Jewish communities refer to their own judicial systems that run side by side with, if you like, the mainstream system that everyone else follows. And that is where, as a people, we have to be moving to. But it's very difficult. It hasn't been helped by the context of the decimation of community law centres, where this type of radical approach to lawyering was being practiced in the UK in the 80s and the 90s. And then a lot of these law centres lost funding from central government, and lawyers have now become literally corporations. Every lawyer has had to become everything. And so what you're finding is that people are running businesses as opposed to getting into the law for the purpose of trying to administer and trying to ensure that underserved, underprivileged, dispossessed, marginalized communities get access to justice. And so there is a battle going on, even in the domain of law and lawyering. But there are all these examples. And what I would say is that we have to search for the alternatives. We have to also be the alternative. We have to become the change that we are seeking. And what we will find is that there are much more people thinking in alignment with we need something different, because we've all been failed by the existing status quo. And what we need to do is build on and support those initiatives, or develop new initiatives where they are not happening. And we can't just look at it locally or in a country context. We have to find the good practice, the models, wherever they come from, especially when our people have shaped them and made them. And then we have to advocate and fight for recognition of our right to actually shape that alternative. And we can do that if we do it as a collective, because if we don't, we can be picked off. And let us not be afraid of being picked off, because we are, one of the callers spoke about white sacrifice. There's also going to be, and there has been, a lot of sacrifice of our own people. But when you are a people that wants to get free, then you recognize, certainly if you're thinking about it on a nation building level, that there will be some sacrifices and there will be casualties, because the war has been declared against us, and many of us don't realize it. We are literally like turkeys looking forward to Christmas.
Did that answer your question, Stacey?
Yeah, it did on a number of levels. I think it was incredibly useful. It would be interesting to find out, I mean, I can Google search anyway, but find out a bit more about some of those projects that you're involved in.
If you contact me, I'm on Facebook, or just, I'm quite easy to find, Esther Stanford-Xosei. I can send you some information, and we can kind of have a further conversation if you're interested.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that was really useful. Thank you. Thanks, Gus.
Thank you. I just wanted to share, when I mentioned earlier, just going back to a caller previously who was asking about support on the ground in Grenfell, and I did mention a Justice for Grenfell campaign. I'm not advocating anything necessarily because I'm not personally involved. That's not the reason why I'm not advocating it, but this has been put out there, and so I can only go with the information that I also am having access to. So the Justice for Grenfell campaign, which has been launched, and then it's got a couple of names that people should contact, and there is the media inquiries. Please contact coordinator Yvette Williams, MBE, and there's a telephone number which is 07714 181 555, and then there's coordinator Ishmael Blagrove, whose number is 07958 287 687. And Ishmael Blagrove has been on social media. There's a couple of videos that kind of was on Channel 4 News and otherwise shared. So, brother, you're you recognize him, or you can Google him. He's a filmmaker as well as many other things. And there's also Toby Laurent, who's the coordinator. And the email is justice4Grenfell@gmail.com. So that's some information that I was sent today in terms of the campaign. And I know that there's an aspect of it that does also include legal strategies and so forth.
Awesome. We will keep folks abreast of that information as well. We had another person who dialed in, the caller, last four digits, 8027. Did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. I come from a very rural area of the United States, and it is lots of tragic arrangements here and a lot of white identification. Do you feel as if it may be a waste of time to speak with these people? I mean, I have tried it before. It never really is like I wanted to, but do you feel like that's a pointless fight? And I'll mute my phone.
Yeah, okay. It may be, but only you will know if you feel you've tried enough. I think that at this stage, a lot of us are firefighting. And when we're firefighting with limited resources, human, material, and otherwise, and fighting against an increasingly resourced opposition, and that can be said in many different ways, we have to choose what battles we fight and who it is that we think we want to spend our time trying to win over. That is the reality. And we have to remember, as I've said, there will be casualties on all sides. On our side, and as your caller earlier mentioned, on the side of other people, other dominating groups as well. But I always feel that we will be drawn to the people who can work with like-minded people, and where possible, concentrate your efforts on like-minded people, but not preaching to the converted. And we have to find ways, and we have to do an internal critique or self-reflection. If we're not able to get through to the ordinary people who are not going to come to the meetings, who are not necessarily going to go and pick up some Black Power book, then we have to change our approach. Yes, because ultimately many of us are marginalized and probably represent a minority of interests, but the masses of our people are going in another direction. And some of those people can be won over, but it does require leadership, and it requires courageous leadership that is unbossed, unbowed, and unbought.
That answer your question, sir? Oh, maybe he muted.
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Right on. Good to know. Before, we don't want to take up your whole evening, I also did want to make sure that I asked, no, Prime Minister Theresa May, she's gotten a good bit of flack, I would say deservedly so, for what has taken place with the Grenfell Tower catastrophe specific, or in addition to everything else. And I think when you did your segment on the BBC's The Big Questions, your final response, they gave you the last word, and you pointed out the role of state government power in perpetuating, maintaining the system of white supremacy, which I thought was really important. And the Grenfell Tower situation might be another example where you touched on earlier in the broadcast. Residents had been reporting that this is a catastrophe waiting to happen, that we think this is a fire trap, this is not up to code, we don't have sprinkler systems, this is not a safe residential area, and the government didn't do anything to adequately address this situation. And even more recently, folks have been saying Theresa May, she has not come out and done a quality job of going out to talk to victims and address and let them know, hey, we are here. And the English government, we're going to support you and we're going to make you whole. I guess I would get in two questions. My first question, do you think this response would be substantially different if the victims at Grenfell were predominantly white? And what would the difference in the response be?
Yes, I believe that the response would be different from the state. not necessarily from people on the ground, because as we've heard and as we know, a lot of people on the ground from different groups, different communities have come together in shock, dismay, and also in service, solidarity and support. But at a state level, Britain is still a white supremacist power. It is an imperial nation state like the United States of America. And yes, they also make casualties of some of their own in order to sustain the wealth and defend the wealth, power and privilege that they enjoy. So I believe that had this been one, it wouldn't have been, you wouldn't necessarily have had a tower block like that just full of white people, only white people. I mean, it's only in specific areas, not necessarily in London would you see that, other parts of the United Kingdom. And if this had happened, I believe that they would have paid more attention to the safety warnings. The Tenants and Residents Association, for instance, the Grenfell Action Group, they would have acted not necessarily in the interest just of the private developers and the big fat cats, but they would have acted in the interest of the group, the white majority residents. That's what I believe would have happened. But it's also the case that in some parts of the UK where they say they're a white working class, they are also victims of neglect. However, I do not feel that there would have been allowed to happen in a borough such as Kensington and Chelsea, where there's so much opulence, so much wealth that people enjoy, and you have a sea of people with plenty, and then you have these pockets of deprivation. And so there would have been a much more serious response. There would have been more intervention. They wouldn't have been spoon feeding the amount of casualties and those dead and telling us that these people are missing. There would be more direct intervention in terms of providing assistance and relief, whether it was even coming from the army, as has happened in some areas where there have been floods and other disasters in rural white areas, more country areas. So yes, the response would have been totally different, and everyone knows it. They know it, and the history is there, the records are there about the untold instances where they could have acted differently. Were it but just for a few thousand more pounds, they could have acted differently, and we wouldn't have had a fire of these proportions if they had regarded the people of Grenfell Tower as people. In fact, they were treated as people, as social undesirables, and their lives did not matter across the board.
Context of white supremacy. Thomas in New York, he asked a few questions earlier, but yesterday when we were discussing this tragedy, and people were saying, there were white people who lived at Grenfell who were victims of the fire and what have you. And he said in the system of white supremacy, if with everything, white power, the way that it's structured for white people to be able to plunder the entire planet, use and abuse black people, non-white people at will, and take what they want, steal, take everything on the planet, even people, that it's set up for white people to be very wealthy, to be very successful, that if you are a white person and you cannot be successful and you're poor and you have to go and live around black people, that you're a failure, given the way that things are set up. Do you think that's an accurate, logical assessment?
Yes, absolutely. You're a failure, you're cannon fodder, but also you're a constituency that historically the white ruling classes have always been able to I shouldn't use that, to win over. They've been able to co-opt them, yes, and actually have them serve their interests. And that's what we've seen. And so there is also, I think, a struggle that the so-called white working class have to wage to definitive victory against their own ruling classes. But they're not going to do that by themselves. They're only going to do that if they are compelled to do it, because the people around them, the black people, the African heritage people, the other peoples, Arabic speaking, so-called migrant refugee communities, compel the white working class to also do the right thing. And that's not just through moral persuasion either.
Got it. Have you seen any evidence that working class, quote unquote, working class white people or poor white people at any point in history, at any point in the world, that a significant number of them are going to discontinue the support and their practice of white supremacy racism?
Very few examples, but there are examples, historically and contemporary, but they are few and far between, and they are not necessarily sustained examples. Yes? So that is something we have to constantly struggle against. But I mean, one example that comes to mind historically, in a UK context, has been the abolitionist movement. That where a lot of the ruling classes and the elites get recognition for abolition of certain forms of chattel enslavement, but actually the campaigns were inspired and led by many ordinary people, many women, in fact, who were disenfranchised and marginalized, who were rose up against their own ruling classes and were against the trafficking of African people and other indigenous peoples of the planet. So there is a history to the abolitionist movement, which is not the common history that gets taught about people like William Wilberforce and all kinds of people who actually were trying to prolong enslavement, but they get credited as being abolitionists. So there is that example in terms of African-led, I have to say that, African-led, but cross-cultural, coming together, not in a necessarily we are the world type of way, but because people were also defending different interests, but at certain points, those interests became compatible at certain points, not throughout our whole struggle. And the abolitionist movement and the African and black leadership of it, which is again part of the subjugated history, is why that happened. Because many of us were here. And the early reparationists were actually abolitionists in the UK. We have people like Oluda Equiano, Otobo Kugwano. They were part of a group called the Sons of Africa. And Otobo Kugwano was one of the first people to call for a commission of inquiry into the evils of enslavement as it was impacting African people in his famous political treatise of 1791. And so, yes, there's a lot of that history and a lot of that knowledge that we've created. We've made a lot of history in these countries, but it's not the common narratives that get taught in the mainstream educational system, or even indeed some of our supplementary schools. And we have to rediscover and reclaim that history and the heritage of our people who rose up in resistance and therefore compelled those working around them to do what they could do. Just as there are some contemporary abolitionists today who are exposing the role of the British government and their ruling classes in actually impoverishing African people today. So a lot of the research that's being done is coming from groups who work around like anti-poverty, anti-debt groups, global justice groups, and they are challenging their government. And some of us work in partnership with them as African groups, but with a view to saying, you don't speak on our behalf, but we recognize that you are doing something to challenge your government. So if this research wasn't done, we wouldn't necessarily know, because there isn't necessarily African data that is being done in that way. That's really giving an accurate amount, and I would say that even the amounts that we're being told are being pillaged are very conservative, yes? But there are some of them who are engaged in that work, and that is useful to us. And that is the role of some of so-called white allies. They have to be struggling against their own people who are making life uninhabitable for the rest of us. And we have seen that happening, especially I mentioned the Mediterranean, where it's literally an open grave because bodies are being found every day, but it's not necessarily being reported on. And even those of us who define ourselves as black are some of the people, when we had the Brexit vote, who were joining in this narrative about immigrants coming in and taking jobs. So some of us, in the same way I've spoken about our people in the USA internalizing that white supremacist mentality, we have them too. And you hear a lot of our people talking about foreigners and talking about Muslims and talking about other groups as though they are some terrible threat. And we ourselves are not paying enough attention to the Africans who are being trafficked, because a lot of them, research has been done, some of them are trying to get to Europe because they think they're going to have a better life, but some of them didn't know they were coming to Europe. They were migrants within African countries and have gone from country to country, and because of war and conflict in particular regions, in North Africa in particular, they have been trafficked. Yes, they found themselves trafficked in particular countries. And that's what we have seen, why a lot of them have ended up coming to Europe. And they talk about members who were kicked out of ships and kicked off of transports that were just left to die because there wasn't enough food. So not enough water to feed people who were just buried alive in the Sahara because there was nowhere for them to go. These are the stories that are coming out, the narratives of the survivors today. And they are not unlike the narratives of our foreparents hundreds of years ago. And that history is going to keep on repeating itself until we have the courage in this generation to stop this current manifestation of the Holocaust. Because each generation has to fulfill its historic mission and duty. And we were told this. Each generation must rediscover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. And too many of us are betraying our mission. So we'll talk about what happened hundreds of years ago, but we're not talking about, and we lack the courage, some of us, to actually dismantle and fight that revolutionary struggle that needs to be waged so that we can ensure that we are all guaranteed a future. Because as long as there are some people left to roam the earth, some people who feel that they have divine right to rule and to dispossess the indigenous peoples of the earth and then to despoil the earth in such a way that they're now looking to go to other planets. That's what they're creating. They don't care about climate change. They don't care about so-called global warming. They don't care about the loss of life, loss of ecosystems, because they feel they have an escape route. And we have to stop that. Because for those of us who see ourselves as people of the earth, this is our home. And none of us are safe because of globalization and the negative impacts of globalization and geopolitics. And we have to stop the current systemic, not just interpersonal, but systemic manifestations of the Mangameism. Just like Africans in previous generations were able to end chattel enslavement in particular phases of our historical development. There was an end to formal colonialism and direct rule. And now we are in another phase. Some people call it neoliberal globalization. Some people call it neo-colonization. Some would say it's direct recolonization again. But whatever it is, however we analyze it, we have to transform that. And that is going to require power. And the power is something that we have. It's latent. It's not yet actual because we are not harnessing it and using our power, our might, our brains, everything. We are not necessarily using it to further ourselves, but we are using it to further the hegemony of other groups.
Context of white supremacy. Lado Equiano mentioned in The Delectable Negro. sleeper top 10 book that we read here on the Cows, Vincent Woodard, and rest in peace, Michael Jackson. You all can check the website for the Global African People's Parliament. It's www.global, African and African with a K, Global African People's Parliament.org, and we'll link it on the Facebook page. We'll link it in the description. We'll tweet it as well so that folks can access. You can get details, updates for the information. The march, our UK listeners, the march that's coming up in August 1, if you want to participate.
Sorry, can I just press the march has its own website, and it's www.reparationsmarch.org. And let me just say, the march is not just a UK thing, it's an international march. People from all over the world participate in it in the UK, but what we also encourage are solidarity actions. They don't have to be marches. People do different things, whether it's a radiothon, whether it's a rally, whatever it is. They do that in solidarity around the world, and that's happening in various countries. In Africa, in Ghana, we have an international or Pan-African libation ceremony as well that takes place in solidarity with what we're doing. And many people might think, yeah, but we weren't colonized or we were not enslaved by Britain. What we say to those people, so for instance, we've got a community of Hereros from Namibia. Many of you will be familiar with the Namibia reparations struggle that they have against Germany for the Herero and Nama Holocaust, the so-called first Holocaust of the 20th century, which was not the so-called Jewish Holocaust. We have a community of them living in the UK, but what we have said is that in Namibia, can they organise a solidarity event where they look at the British complicity in their own Holocaust in terms of Germany. And Britain did play a role because it colluded with Germany and it covered up what Germany was doing. And then in terms of its territory, it literally handed over, after German rule, it handed over rule of Namibia to another European power. So we look at white people globally, how whether they call themselves Europeans, German, French, Dutch, whatever, how they're able to support one another in their global machinations for conquest and power. And we ourselves, in resistance to that, must also find ways to globalize and to link our struggles in a way that is transnational blackness, transnational Pan-Africanism as well.
The websites are both linked on our Facebook page, www.globalafricanpeoplesparliament.org, and that's African with a K, and then www.reparationsmarch.org. Again, www.
And there's also, final one is the Stop the Mangamizi, which is the sister campaign to the march, and that is www.stopthemangamizi, MAANGAMIZI.com. So please visit all of them. Thank you.
For sure. Esther Stanford-Xosei joining us live again. She's been on the program repeatedly, as I said before, and not just sharing great information, but suggesting great guests that we've had on the program as well. Always a pleasure to have her on the broadcast, and particularly with such an important, really just a catastrophe, but such a really important moment, I think, that's going to be recognized historically, to have her on to get some of her insight about this event, to make sure that we get an accurate understanding. Just for our listeners, both here in the States, UK, folks that had heard you before and were excited that you could come back and speak with us again, folks who were able to chime in, ask questions, just thank you so much for sharing some of your Monday evening with us. Such a pleasure to have you back on the program. We'll look forward to speaking with you again soon, and we'll be keeping an eye out, I guess some of us directly for the folks who are there, but certainly keeping an eye out and looking forward to your events coming up August 1. Oh, are you still with us? Oh.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear you for a while. Woo! Thought we had some tech issues.
I know you want to keep coming with. Remember this? I'm just trying to let you close out.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Thank you so much. We appreciate you. I'm going to post the links on Twitter. I got them on Facebook, but I'm going to make sure I post the links on Twitter as well for our listeners to support. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you too, and thank you all to the listeners of the show. Greetings and good night.
Absolutely. Good evening. Context of White Supremacy. I lost count. I think this is either her fourth or fifth time being on the program. I have to go back to double count. But as I said, she's been with us repeatedly. I think Leo Muhammad, if my memory is accurate, was the person who said, yeah, you should get Esther Stanford-Xosei as a guest on the broadcast. I think you all would enjoy having her. And we have repeatedly down through the years. Mr. Leo Muhammad saw one of his videos earlier today as well. He also has been repeatedly a guest on the couch. As I said, we had our Global Sunday Talk on Racism yesterday, once a month, third Sunday of each month. But I said we have for years worked to get people on the broadcast from different parts of the globe. That's been something that I think is super important, that racism, white supremacy, it's not just something that's in one little small part of the world. It's not something, because I hear this all the time from black people, that you can leave wherever you are and go someplace and you won't have to deal with white people. They won't be causing problems for you. That place does not exist unless I have been, way misinformed. That is still going to be a problem. It'll just change the nature of the problem and how you're having to deal with them. But there is no place to run. We are going to have to deal with and resolve this issue permanently, I would say, because this problem's been going on for a long time, but very important to look at this from an international perspective, as she stated repeatedly throughout the program. And I think that's been evident in our archives and the folks that we've had speak with us. We should be back on Thursday for Workplace Racism, normal time. Been early the last 2 days, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, every Thursday for Workplace Racism. Friday, session number 3, Gil Scott-Heron, his autobiography, The Last Holiday, a memoir, normal time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. And we'll be doing Dr. Tommy Curry, when Mrs. Stanford-Xosei, when she was speaking about the non-human treatment of the black victims of the Grenfell Tower, and in Namibia, various examples. Just pick one. New Cross Fire, the black people not even being treated as humans. I had the book in front of me, Dr. Tommy Curry, The Man Not. His book just came out this year. He's been a guest in this program so many times over the years, but he had been talking about working on his book, and it was finally published this year. He'll be on the program a week from today, actually a week from tomorrow, next Tuesday, the 27th. He'll be with us. We'll be talking about his new book, as well as some of the other events that have taken place this past year. I think this will be his first time visiting with us the 2017 calendar year. But if you have guest suggestions, if you can't find something in the archives, just, problem in general, feel free, drop an email, untiljustice@gmail.com. untiljustice@gmail.com. We'll try to resolve whatever the issue is, or if it's guest suggestion, gripe, whatever. untiljustice@gmail.com. With that, I'll check in to see if the folks that are listening in, if you all have any quick point that you want to get in. I'm hoping we'll have more folks from the UK. I'll be continuing to pay attention to what's happening with the Grenfell situation, and would encourage other folks to as well. Hopefully we can get more people to come on the broadcast to kind of give updates as all of this kind of progresses, since it's, they're still searching, the number of fatalities is still being updated on a daily basis. So there's lots more to come with this situation. And hopefully, as I said, we'll be staying on top of things. If folks have any quick questions, listeners, I think Thomas in New York, Red, some of the other folks who dialed in who had questions during the broadcast. If you all had anything that you wanted to get in before we wrap things up, you should be with us. Any quick comments or questions you all needed to get in?
Hey Gus, I have a question for you. Because I wasn't able to finish participating in the Coretta Scott King book study session. I had to go back in the archives, and my ways of checking the archives broke. So But either way, did she ever mention Martin Luther King's mother's death?
Yes, she did, in detail. Graphic detail.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to go back and listen. I just was curious about that. And this was a great show. The lady, man, she was very insightful, very inspiring. And, a lot of the things that she was explaining in Britain, like every time you do the Sunday show, in Britain in particular, is exactly, they run the same system as they do here. I think a little different because the people that they're dealing with aren't natives or indigenous to, Britain. They're from either Africa or the Caribbean, whereas, they pretty much are stuck with us. So it was just very interesting. And, I wanted to ask her that my next question was going to be if she thought that this was being done deliberately, and if they have any ways to have an investigation, because a few years ago here in New York, they sold one of the high-rise complexes of Stuyvesant Town, which is on the Lower East Side. And, I mean, they sold it for $4 billion. I mean, these public housing and things, these skeletal structures just themselves, they could go in and regenerate them and do whatever they want to the insides are worth so much money. And obviously, I think with gentrification, the last strongholds for black people will be the public housing. So they're going to have to figure out a way to get rid of them. And I just wonder if this is going to be a trend of seeing, random project buildings and things burning so they could clear out an area and regenerate it. And I'm my line. Thank you.
I think they just had a £10 million renovation or refurbishment of the Grenfell Tower. That's been widely talked about, and what either it was very lame, very ineffective, and or it may not even have been up to code. But obviously, the evidence shows that it was not effective. But that has been widely cited. And if you want to go to Hurricane Katrina, I mean, hey, we read Gary Rivlin's Katrina After the Flood, where he talked about in detail how that was one of the centerpieces of that whole debacle, them tearing down public housing. And that you have a housing crisis in New Orleans, and the housing, since they tore down all that public housing and they did not rebuild the same number of units or more to accommodate, the citizens that were there, the price of rent skyrocketed after Katrina. So the same types of problems, they'll put all kinds of fancy terms on it, housing instability. I don't know what they call that over in the UK or Canada or wherever you happen to be on the planet, but racism, white supremacy is a global system, and racists do a lot of the same types of things. I know a lot of, or I won't say a lot, but I did hear a number of different interviews and what have you, even from the BBC and Channel 4, where some of the black residents / victims of this, they were saying what Thomas in New York said. They were saying that they thought this could have been done, this fire could have been set deliberately to get them out, that they felt like they were not wanted, that this is an area in a very posh section of London. And hey, we have a tragic excuse to get rid of these dark people, and we can make it a condo or, whatever we want to make it. And we can have more space for the good whites of London. Ms. Stanford-Xosei, if you're still here, did you want to share any thoughts on that, whether this may have been?
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely a view that is there on the ground, and that was one of the earliest views that came out, that this could have been done deliberately. It's not one that I can comment really much further on, because when I do comment on things, I like to have actual facts. And to obviously be able to say that I've investigated something properly before I give out misinformation. But that would not be a surprise. And that is very, very possible because the community, it wasn't just the Grenfell Action Group, but the communities themselves had been resisting this gentrification. And the comment was made by the callers talking about sort of comparing the UK and the USA and sort of saying the differences that many of us have come from outside in the UK, whereas in the USA it's like they're stuck with you. Where that's also the case for many people here, because many people have been born here and they don't necessarily want to go back to where their parents or their grandparents came from, and they see this as their home. And so, if you like, they are stuck there. And these are still people, despite generations of being in this country, I mean, hundreds of years of us being here, we are still not accepted. And unfortunately, the worship of money has become like a god. And so those big fat cats who just wanted to keep on gathering more and more for themselves, and you mentioned this 10 million in regeneration, but what you often find when you investigate these schemes is there's a lot of corruption. That's what they put on paper that they're spending, but the money often gets siphoned off in all kinds of other ways. Yes. So it's not necessarily the case, and certainly they don't spend that amount of money where we are going to be the ones who are going to be benefiting it. They're only going to spend that money if they feel they're going to get the benefit from it. So we must always bear that in mind. And there are a lot of players. So when you investigate the private developers company, you find that shareholders of that company were some of these Tory bigwigs, Conservative Party, I should say, who were also shareholders in the developer company, the private developers and so forth. So it's a big scam that's going on, a lot of corruption, and that is how a lot of the money is getting siphoned out of local communities in the same way that they're doing it in Africa and other parts of the world that they formerly colonized in a formal, direct way. They're doing it locally. So we literally have neo-colonies. We are living in neo-colonies here in the UK. You have neo-colonies of black people of African heritage and indigenous heritage also in the USA too.
Wow. Just with the report, because I think Thomas in New York was also saying like an investigation about the cause of the fire and how it spread so quickly. They could, reminding me of Stephen Lawrence, we've had Mrs. Doreen Lawrence on the program repeatedly as well. They did eventually come out with the McPherson report years after he was slaughtered and killed and left in the gutter to die, literally. They did come out with the report to say, yeah, that was tragic. And we have systemic racism in the police department. And moving forward, we still have the same problem. And Mark Duggan happened roughly almost 20 years after Stephen Lawrence, where you almost had the exact same problem acknowledged and pointed at. So they might even come out with the report and say, yep, they siphoned off some of the funds and we didn't do the refurbishment properly and the cladding was. They could say that. They could say that, there's evidence that this fire might have been started deliberately, but the damage will have been done. And if it's, we burnt it down and we're not building it back, or we're not putting the people back, all of the residents and what have you, the ones that survived, they'll just be relocated someplace else. And, they could do that too.
Yeah. And in fact, there was something I shared on Facebook yesterday, a video where they were talking about the problems with these high-rise tower blocks like Grenfell Tower. And they knew of some of the problems, not even just in terms of the cladding, which was responsible for they're saying, for the quick spreading of the fire, if we're to believe these reports that are coming out officially. But they knew some of these problems would occur with the actual design of them. They knew this in the 1980s. So there's a group that's kind of released this footage of a documentary where you had white people literally talking about what they knew back then. And some of them who were condemning the use of the actual buildings as being a failure, that they were not really about regenerating communities. It was going to produce untold social problems. And everything that they said back then would happen has happened. So yes, what you will often find is that they put things out into the public domain. It's just that where they put it out, sometimes we don't know they're putting it out, and sometimes it's so in your face that it becomes normalized and therefore it doesn't become seen. But they often don't hide because they have this tendency where they will often cast each other out. They will cast each other out, and there's plenty of evidence of that in the history of Caucasian people.
Absolutely. Red or any of the other folks, you'll have a comments you needed to get in, final comment or question, anything you needed to get in before we wrap things up?
Gus?
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yes.
I can wait. I can wait. It's fine.
All right. Thank you, Stacey. It's just really quick. I just wanted to know, because I have been looking up some of the websites that Mrs. Stanford-Xosei suggested. I just wanted to know if there's any, basically a British version of, Democracy Now! Or anything like that. Not saying that I fully agree with everything that Democracy Now! And I forget the Young Turks, that type of, I wonder if there's a British equivalent to see if maybe if any of them will be a little bit more truthful, not all the way, of course, on the Grenfell Tower situation. That's all I had. And I'll mute my line. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I can't think of an equivalent of Democracy Now!, but there is a lot of different websites, but there's not one that I could particularly name where we're going to get alternative views. But I think people just have to keep Googling, because that's how I also have found out information. We have to be able to use the technology and know how to search to find those critical perspectives. And just by using odd keywords, you will get some of the critical narratives that are probably not being reported on in the mainstream media. And Facebook, a lot is being shared on Facebook, but obviously you have to be in certain Facebook kind of threads to receive that information, and I know through WhatsApp. So the information is getting out there, but there's not necessarily one website that I could say go onto this place, apart from the ones that I've mentioned, where they are updating the public and they are keeping them informed as to the various machinations that are going on too.
Stacey in London, did you have a question as well or a comment?
Yeah, this is slightly wider than the Grenfell incident. It may not have been picked up as yet in America, but this morning over here there was a white terrorist attack where a driver has mowed down a number of people outside of a mosque. And it was reluctantly named as a terrorist attack. I don't know, Esther, if you've picked that up and if you had.
Yeah, oh yes, I was waking up to it this morning and have been following it. Yes. And what's interesting, sister, is that if you notice the way in which the media, as you said, reluctantly have classified it as terrorism, but they use this mental health defense. So the first thing they told us is that the person who had been apprehended by, these were Muslims who were obviously in Ramadan, they had just come out of a mosque. And they were mown down a vehicle, a white van, with in between 1 and 3 perpetrators. But officially they're saying it's 1. But there are reports from Muslims and other community members on the ground who are saying there were 3 people, but only 1 was apprehended. And the first thing they're telling us is that they took this person to the hospital first. And then they're releasing strategically into the media that he had some kind of mental health challenges in his past. And we've seen that, especially with some of the cases in the USA, the shootings, the church shooting that you had. They always, when it comes to white terrorists, white supremacist terrorists, they bring up this mental health defense.
Absolutely. I did see some of that in the news before we went live. Obviously, with the time difference, we went live. It was about noon here, so most of the time I was prepping for the program, but I did see some of the articles talking about that incident. I think they did use the term terrorism, at least in the report that I read before we went on the air. The word terrorism was used and how this event was described. I think if that had been a situation where these suspects had been non-white people, I think it would have been everybody would have been placed under, not the one person, not one, it would have been everybody. And then who are their families? Do they have relatives who are staying here? That tends to be
exactly
the way it goes when the alleged perpetrators are, have a little bit too much melanin. Did we got your question, Stacey? Did anybody else have a final comment, question they needed to get in? I forgot Stacey was even with us. Slipped my mind. Yes, sir.
All right, just the voice again. I just wanted to say real quick that I think it's very important that everybody attends community and commissioner meetings. I attended a meeting down here in Dania Beach because a friend of mine, we're doing a documentary of the first black city of Florida. And while attending the meeting, there were 3 black women that were in the meeting, and they were crying, but we didn't know because we attended the meeting kind of not on time. So when we got there, they were already in the midst of, shedding tears. But they end up going to the podium and they started to release what their concerns were. And I noticed that they were talking about their high-rise, the building that they lived in is in the black community, it's a rundown high-rise. And they were crying about because one lady, her son, ended up having breathing issues because the building had mold. Her children had multiple marks of bed bugs. They had appliances that weren't working, and they had made several accounts of trying to get things done, and they weren't trying to get it done. And then the interesting part of it was the commissioners were telling them, oh, well, we really can't do anything on this level. You have to go with the Board of Housing. And then they were saying she ended up letting out, I don't know if it was confidential, I don't know if it was showing compassion, but she said, oh, the person, because they were saying that they went to the higher mark of the person who's in charge of the housing and they're not doing anything. So they wanted to know if they could go any higher, and they thought the commissioners were the people in charge. And the commissioners in return said, no, you have to go back and, talk to them again. But I'm going to let you know a secret. Well, I'm going to let it be known that the board of the housing came to us and asked us for a lump sum of money to revamp the whole building structure. And they said that the reason the commissioners did not give them the money is because they said once they redo the building, that the individuals that occupy the building, they won't be able to live there anymore because their rent will go up and they won't be able to afford it. So they knew that, and if they did do the renovation, the people that's inside the building, they will be placed basically homeless until the renovations are finished. So I just wanted to let you guys know that it's very important for you guys to go to these meetings, and you'll see a lot of things that you normally don't see in the papers or anybody else express. And I'll mute my line.
Yeah, absolutely.
Indeed. Stay informed. That's why I say, really make an effort to stay informed. Reading the newspaper, just being aware, going online, whatever sources of information you can get locally, nationally, globally, be informed. And I mean local, it doesn't get more local than getting updates. I think if they have those neighborhood meetings and what have you, if you're a homeowner, well, they have a lot of the same things that can talk about, do you have a street light? Do you have a stop sign or a stoplight on your street corner? Those things can be very, very important. Make sure that you stay informed about that. That can be a major way to just additional information to help you make great choices under dangerous conditions of racism, white supremacy. Did anybody else? Final question, comment they need to get in? Folks satisfied? Anything else? Folks good? Great. Again, we'll be here on Thursday. Workplace Racism, normal time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. We might even have Stacy in London back with us live at our normal late time. We'll have to see. Again, thanks to Mrs. Esther Stanford-Xosei for hanging in. She's been with us and given up almost all of her Monday evening to speak with us. As I said, always a pleasure to have you on the program, and we'll look forward to speaking with you again soon. I was able to tweet out Facebook the links to all of the different sites. So if you need additional information, just go to the Twitter page, go to our Facebook, and you should have easy access. And in fact, if you go to www.globalafricanpeoplesparliament.org, their top post, Grenfell, another crime of the Manangamizi against which we must all keep rising up. I'll post that link specifically to that post as well. But thanks, everyone, for tuning into the broadcast. I hope it was a constructive investment, I guess, for wherever you are in the world. For some people, your Monday afternoon. For others, your Monday evening. But hopefully constructive. And we'll be back at minimum. We'll be back on Thursday. I would suggest, as usual, sobriety would be best under conditions of white supremacy. War is being waged against black people worldwide at all times. We want to be able to make great decisions. I mean, as Grenfell shows, your life may be on the line at any moment. I don't think you want to be in that situation and be intoxicated at that moment, and now you got to make life-saving decisions. You never know when you're going to bump into a race soldier, badge or no. Dr. Welsing, Mr. Fuller, Dr. Kanban, I think a lot of the folks that we have some reverence for, I think they would say, yeah, I think black people would be in a better position sober so that we can function at maximum capacity to go about solving this problem immediately. That said, Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cal signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. Problem. You're a victim. Man, I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Mm-hmm. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.